Hello, Deathwish Enforcer is a two-dimensional walk and gun where you must clear the streets of San Francisco from unscrupulous citizens, blast your way through 7 levels and put an end to a nefarious syndicate. This game would fit very well in an arcade because this is an experience with strong retro vibes. Deathwish Enforcer is published by Limited Run Games, which means that it is released in physical format. But of course you can buy it in Nintendo's eShop for $23. The question is whether it is worth the price. In this review we take a closer look at Deathwish Enforcers. Feel free to subscribe to my channel, I review new games every week. As said, the game takes place in San Francisco, where a syndicate led by the Big Boss has taken over the streets. To make the city safer, a gang of 4 cops must shoot everything in their path. It's time to deal with porn kings, gangsters and zombies to ensure that the good guys will win. The game's narrative is basically completely free of text, but contains some cutscenes that take us through what this is about. The story is presented in an effective way. These are good, these are evil, no bullshit, destroy. But of course, I don't want to reveal too much, but overall, the plot is very straightforward. You shouldn't expect too many complicated twists and turns. That said, it feels like the point of the game isn't its story. There are simply other values that can be perceived as prioritized, for example, the gameplay. You can choose between 4 different police officers with unique characteristics. Larry uses a gun and his ammo is relatively powerful. Cleo uses what I think is a Winchester that fires 2 bullets at once. Chuck is perhaps the one that differs the most, as his spread gun covers a larger area. And finally we have Diana, who with 2 guns is probably the one who fires the most bullets in the shortest time. Notably, all police officers have different abilities that may suit different players. Personally, I appreciate Chuck, and not just out of nostalgia. Sure, you might remember how effective the spread gun was in Contra, but the principle here is similar. It is a merciless weapon and works very well in various situations. What is worth noting is that you can set the difficulty level before you start playing. Easy, normal, hard and ouch. I have tried the different difficulties and from what I could find, the enemy shoots faster projectiles at ouch. Also, they have a bigger health pool. This was especially noticeable on the bosses, as it took significantly longer to kill them. There is also the option to set the number of lives and continues. 9 is the maximum. But I wonder if this really matters. If you become game over, you return to the beginning, and if you choose retry last level, you can start from the level where you last died, with new lives and new continues. So the game's setup is to get through 7 levels, where each level always ends with a boss fight. Among other things, you walk around what I assume is the slums of San Francisco, but you also have to shoot down enemies out by the sea, and also get through vertical stages where you have to avoid a building in flames or avoid dangers in an elevator shaft. In fact, it's a relatively short but compact game. It should be entirely possible to complete everything in about an hour. Mostly this is about walking around and shooting, but there are variations that make it more interesting. For example, levels where you use a motorcycle. Here you have to act quickly and shoot down incoming enemies while avoiding their attacks, but sometimes you also have to jump over obstacles. Yeah, of course the motorcycle can jump. But before we discuss enemies and bosses, there is relevance in finding out what our police officers can do. You use the left stick or D-pad to move. You jump on the A button and dash by pressing down and A at the same time. You can crouch by pressing down. You shoot with the B button and fire special attacks with Y. If you are in close combat, you can box your opponent. And that basically sums up everything you have to deal with. But I have to say that the control gives a mixed impression. Above all, it doesn't feel so smooth to switch between shooting and dashing. They don't feel so synchronized. It's like you have to finish your attack before you can dash, which means that you have to prioritize your choices carefully before doing anything. In addition, you have a relatively large hitbox, so what can be challenging is avoiding taking damage, but at the same time you have to take risks and fire yourself, so there is a balance between shooting or being very defensive and dashing away. But here it should also be added that this is how I experienced it when I played solo, and maybe the intention is actually to play co-op. Up to 4 players. My experience is that the gameplay becomes completely different when you play 2 players. This is because you can cover for each other to fire more projectiles and reduce the chance of the enemy having time to damage you. And playing co-op is, in my opinion, one of the game's great assets. I believe that entertainment value increases as more people participate. So buy a nice sofa, invite your friends and shoot until you succeed. I recommend this. Unfortunately, it is not possible to play online. When it comes to the enemies, there is actually quite a bit of variety. Some enemies throw dynamite, others shoot projectiles or use knives. Other enemies use motorcycles and can literally run you over if you don't react quickly. Then we have the classic zombies. They basically have similar attacks as the regular enemies, but, well, zombies are zombies, so it's at least an unexpected visual detail. There are more enemies that have their own unique attributes, and what is worth mentioning is that the game is based on trial and error. At first it can feel like the enemy has the upper hand, because you don't know what to expect, but when you have run through the levels a couple of times, it should perhaps be easier to recognize the enemy's patterns, how they move and which attacks they use. I also want to highlight the bosses, which I think are relatively well designed. At least they are completely unique from each other. Every boss has its own strengths and weaknesses, and it can be an advantage to find out how they are designed, how they behave, move and attack. Blindly trying to take down a boss without even thinking defensively can prove devastating. Sometimes you have to be in the right place at the right time to avoid getting hurt. I would also like to say that the bosses gradually becomes more difficult. At first they can prove to be relatively forgiving, but the further you go, the more crap is thrown at you. There are bullets everywhere, there are enemies coming from all corners and edges, and you have to stay sharp as not to get hurt. But basically I think all bosses have a sustainable design, that they all come with their own quirks and that it gradually becomes more challenging. Deathwish Enforcers is a game that basically works well to play alone, but is advantageously played with others. At least in my opinion, it's much more fun to collaborate with others than to do everything yourself. I also want to mention that the game works well both handheld and docked. I haven't noticed any major problems with the frame rate, nor have I encountered any crashes. What I think is a problem is the control, which gives a mixed impression. You keep a relatively low walking speed, which becomes extra noticeable when you play alone. This in combination with other maneuvers that do not feel so smooth. For example, switching between shooting and dashing, which I think feel averse. But that somehow matters less when you play co-op. This is because together with your friends you can find a common path forward and can cover and shoot without necessarily having to dodge damage to the same extent. As I said, the price is $23, which I consider too high. Basically, this is a solid indie game, but perhaps a slightly lower price would have given a fairer reflection of the actual value. Walk and gun, play with friends, shoot down everything in your path, make your way through 7 levels and slaughter all bosses. If everything is done perfectly, you will be done within an hour. $23, the choice is yours. Feel free to subscribe to my channel, I review new games every week. Have a good day, see ya!